following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Golenbock University. I'm Ralph Tycho with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And the man is here, Peter Golenbock. How are you, sir?
I'm just fine. Thank you, Ralphie. Just fine.
Good. We're going to be joined by Mark Littell before very long. But first, let's talk about something that has been in my craw for a long time.
Okay.
And there was an article that on this gentleman on Facebook today, and I forwarded it to you earlier.
Yeah.
You've had experience with the man. I'm a New York Met fan, as you know.
Right.
He was, at one time, my favorite all-time New York Met. He represented everything that I thought was admirable in a baseball player.
And you're not wrong about that. We're talking about Lenny Dykstra, and you're not wrong about that. You're not.
He was an overachiever. He was an overachiever and a hustler.
Right.
And
nobody
really
played the game harder. Nobody wanted to win more. Nobody gave, what he gave when he was
on
playing.
The field. And
yeah.
As an unobservant fan, or observant, but an outsider, I worship the guy. And
sure.
This bugs me mainly because of, our heroes sometimes have clay feet, as the saying goes. This guy had, he fit all the category of he was the poster boy for clay feet. And I want you to comment. You had dealings with him. You were writing a book with him. And we've talked about this before. He messed you over, Peter.
Well, that's his nature. It's kind of what he does. I wasn't the first. In fact, when I was asked to do this book with Lenny, with Google today, you can learn just about anything you want to learn. And at least two people wrote books about him, about how they were screwed over by Lenny. One of them was called Nailed, N-A-I-L-E-D, was called Nailed.
That was the author's title.
Yeah, incredibly, scathing, commentary about their experiences with Lenny. But see, as a writer, I find that people like Lenny are, it's just wonderful to work with. It's very exciting to do a book with somebody like, Lenny Dykstra. Every day.
And interesting seeing humanity at
yes,
real up close and personal.
Well, until he, screwed me over, we were like brothers. We worked on this book 9-10 months. We talked to each other about every other day, and we were just humming right along, and it was so much fun. The stories he would tell about, he made a tremendous amount of money after he left the Mets to go to the Philadelphia Phillies. By the way, one of the worst trades the Mets ever made was trading him to the Phillies. Traded him for a Phillies second baseman, and played the guy Juan Samuel was his name.
Juan Samuel, who was...
And they played him in center field for the Mets, and it was just... it basically cut the heart out of the whole Mets team when they traded him away. And at the time, it enabled Philadelphia to win a pennant in 1980 with Lenny in center field, leading them to a pennant. But he was making $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 a year, and he was doing things like he developed a following for stocks and bonds. He was a stocks and bonds guy. He would periodically, the fella on CNBC, the guy who does stocks and bonds. He would have Lenny on to talk about stocks and bonds.
Really? Wow.
And so Lenny would tell me that baseball sent him to Europe on a goodwill tour, and he and his whoever he was with, his wife, I suppose, were in this French restaurant, very fancy French restaurant in Paris, and he mentioned this particular wine that he wanted, and so the sommelier said to him, "Well, that's $3,200 a bottle." And he ended up buying one bottle for the table, and I think 3 more bottles to take home with him. You know, that sort of thing. Now he was on the 10th floor of a high rise in Germany, and he looked down. He's telling me, and he saw a German Shepherd. And as a kid, he had a German Shepherd dog, and he decided, I want that German Shepherd dog. So he gets on the elevator, he goes downstairs, and he goes and says to the lady who's got the dog, I want to buy your dog. And the lady looks at him and goes, I'm not selling you my dog. So Lenny says, I'll give you $5,000 for the dog. And the lady says no. And according to Lenny, he ended up, buying the dog from this woman for $25,000, which tells you something about, when Lenny wanted something, by gosh, he was going to get it. But we would have.
I guess that's that mindset. You're pissing away money. You'll never go through it. In your mind, you've got more than enough to.
Right.
To last you.
But the interesting thing was we'd have these very interesting political conversations, having nothing to do with the book.
Right.
Because I was a staunch Democrat, and he was a huge fan of Donald Trump's.
Whoa.
He accused the Clintons of murdering 50 people. All of that nonsense that comes out of the far right wing.
When we both know it was only Powers. It was just...
So he would tell me why he loved Trump and why Trump's going to make a great president, and and the funny thing was, it's because the two of them could have been twins. They were both narcissists of the worst sort. Where Lenny was always convinced that he was the smartest person in the room, that nobody could tell him what to do. He was smarter and better than everybody else. That sort of narcissism, which was, was comical until right at the end, where I was at the last chapter of the book, where I had a clause in my contract that said, if for any reason Lenny isn't happy with what you're doing, he can he could fire you. And that's what he did. And unfortunately the publisher didn't want to deal with him either, and so it was like, tough noogies kind of a thing. It's the same sort of thing you find out that Trump does, where when he had casinos, he'd hire people to do carpentry and, provide him with this, that, and the other, and he'd pay the guy half upon signing and owe the guy the other half upon completion. And so with Trump, the guy would complete it, and Trump would say, I'm not paying you. And it was like, you want your money, sue me. And then he would take, this guy, Michael Cohn, and, send Michael Cohn after the guy to, make him go away. And Lenny
whoever else he could find to play gangster. I mean, I'm convinced that he's a Don, and he runs the country like a Don.
Oh, you're talking about Trump now? Oh, yeah. Well, no question about it. Right. I mean, he knows more than the generals, on and on and on like that. But with Lenny, part of the story, before I knew him, was that Lenny was accused of fraud. He was accused of fraud. He was going bankrupt, and apparently he sold a certain number of thousands of dollars worth of value from the house he bought. He bought the house in California of the great hockey player Gretzky. He bought Gretzky's house for a ridiculous amount of money, and in the end he didn't have enough money to keep it. And so as the thing was in foreclosure, he was selling off pieces of it, and he was accused of, fraud, and he went to jail for 6 months. He did. Lenny's other problem was that, and I'm sure it's still true, is that he was an addict of the worst sort. Some sort of drugs, I'm not sure what it was, and he was also a sex addict. But it doesn't matter, whatever addict you are. I'm telling you, if you're a bad enough addict, one of three things happens. Either you go broke, or you go to jail, or you die. And he's had two of the three so far. And since we parted ways, you've probably noticed in the newspaper, he was living, and still is apparently, in South Jersey somewhere. And he had ordered up a Uber driver. And then when Lenny decided he didn't want to go to point A, he wanted to go to point B, apparently the Uber driver didn't want to take him for whatever reason. And Lenny put a gun to the guy's head.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so he's got that over him. That's holding over him right now. Eventually that will go to trial. And you sent me this article yesterday where he bought a house in South Jersey for like $300,000. And quite frankly, I have no idea where he got the money to buy that house. But what he's doing in order to pay for it is he's renting out the rooms. So in other words, he's putting bathrooms in his house so that he could have more B&B customers. He's selling his rooms for $1,000 a week or something like that.
Boy, on a large scale, he's just like my grandmother, who had a boarder that lived on the third floor of the house in the Bronx, and you had to be careful to be quiet for the boarder.
Right. The problem, yeah, no question about it. The problem with Lenny, though, is he's filled this house in this very quiet neighborhood with all sorts of miscreants. And so the noise of the place has gotten too bad for the neighborhood, and they've got neighbors who are, bitching and moaning to the city because in that city you're not allowed to have B&B. There is no B&B in that particular city in New Jersey. And so he's been fined $500 and told to get rid of the bathrooms. And, before the thing's over, he's going to be back in jail. I don't think there's any question about it.
Well, did you see a hint coming? I mean, you knew you had it in your contract, but you're working with him all along, and it's going good. Were you surprised? Totally shocked?
Well, you can't be totally shocked. When you read the articles and the books that all these other people have written about him. And the funny thing
but along the way you developed an intimacy, is it?
Well, it turns out that the friendship has really to do with the fact that as long as I could help him out, that I was his friend. I mean, as Trump is the same way. As long as the person can be a benefit to Trump, that's going to be Trump's friend. But as long as you're no longer a benefit, he boots you out the door. I mean, this is a person who doesn't really have any friends. Lenny has no friends. He had a woman who worked for him for years and years and years. I still don't understand why she did it. But she was really his only friend. And it wasn't of a sexual nature. She was a mother figure.
Which drugs do you suppose damaged him the most? And I don't mean physically, I mean mentally.
Well, it's very hard to know. I mean, one of the interesting topics in our book was the fact that he was one of the very first people to use steroids. When he went from the Mets to the Phillies that first year, the Phillies played him every day. And he was a 5'10", 100.
Yeah, he used to platoon with Mookie, basically.
Yeah, he platooned with Mookie with the Mets, but with the Phillies he played every day.
Right.
And he said that come the end of August and September, he hit about 140. The bat got really heavy, and he was having difficulty, being successful. So his wife at the time lived in Mississippi, and so he decided that he would go find a doctor who would prescribe something to him that would allow him to bulk up so that when he played the very next year, he would have a much more successful season. And he hit upon the proper type of steroids and how to use it. He had a program and a plan. And by the time he got to spring training in the spring, everybody noticed that this was a different guy. I mean, this was a really sort of powerful, different Lenny Dykstra. And Lenny, of course, told everybody that he did it because of his weightlifting. And Lenny also said that he was the one who told Barry Bonds how to do it, which I thought was interesting, too.
Well, you don't just take the steroids and get bigger. You do have to weight lift as well.
Oh, no two ways about it. But Lenny
Bonds
proved
and
to
these
himself.
guys work very hard.
Oh, yeah. That's absolutely right. But clearly the steroids was the key to Lenny's success. I mean, when you're hitting 140, you better do something, and he figured it out. I mean, which is the other reason when people say to me, oh, he takes steroids. Well, quite frankly, in the next few years, I would say 90% of them were taking steroids because once you figured out what it could do, and it wasn't illegal at the time, you figured you better take it or somebody's going to take your position.
And
so,
even now,
Barry
it's
Bonds,
the same thing, except there's the mask going on. So I would venture to say that as many people are using steroids or human growth hormones or this, that, and the other thing, it's just a new generation of it. And that, in essence, if the more people that use, the more the playing field is balanced.
That's right. No, that's my argument. I don't think that Roger Clemens did anything so terrible. He was doing what everybody else was doing.
Exactly.
The fact that he's not in the Hall of Fame is ridiculous to me. But obviously there's always two sides to every story.
As you've pointed out to me over these years, that Bonds was facing relief pitchers who were every bit as steroided out or steroidal as he was.
Starting pitchers too. I mean, that's right.
Guys routinely pitching 98 miles an hour. Look, that just doesn't happen. You don't go from generation throwing the same size ball. And when Bob Feller threw 100, it was an unbelievable miracle.
No question. No question.
Nolan Ryan.
When Nolan Ryan was throwing what he was throwing, he was a freak. He was a freak doing what he was doing. And
I'm just guessing that Nolan Ryan might have been dipping in anything that was going on.
It's certainly possible, but nothing was going on back when Nolan was pitching. What was going on back then was that people were taking greenies, and what greenies would do was pep you up, would give you a focus, give you a real focus when you were hitting. I mean, the whole team was on greenies. I mean, the 1980 World Series that I attended, which was the Kansas City team. Lenny was on that team, actually. George Brett and those guys. All those guys were on greenies. And that wasn't illegal either. I mean, it was just something everybody did.
Right. And lest we forget that when Mark McGwire was pictured in this locker room with supplements behind him, they were legal at that point.
That's right. No, that's right. Mark McGwire has been very unfairly sort of labeled. Sammy Sosa's been unfairly labeled. These were fabulous, fabulous players who ought to be given, and they will be eventually, given their due.
Well, I don't think either of them are Hall of Famers.
I do. You just look at their numbers.
Well,
anybody who can hit 66 home runs in a season is a Hall of Famer. I don't care. That's just too fabulous for words. And I know people disagree with me. You're not the only one. But then again, I didn't think, that Bernie Sanders should have run for president either. So,
No, and you thought Hillary should run.
She did run. She was. She was.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. So believe me, the thought of her running to me is just as amusing as the thought of Bernie running is to you.
Well, of course, you understand that she gained 3 million more votes than the other guy got. You know that.
Oh, no question about that.
They just weren't in the right. They just weren't in the right states.
Right. That's for sure. And you know who's impressing me though, as we delve into politics? Elizabeth Warren today announced, and she's been all over the news and making speeches. And she comes right out and says something. She says, I may not be facing this bozo in 2020. It may be that he's either arrested or removed. She said that. That takes a lot of guts, I think.
No, it's true. And she has a lot of reason to be very angry with him, because he's been incredibly nasty with this whole Pocahontas business.
Right.
She's a Harvard professor. She's a very serious person. She's an extremely intelligent and extremely capable person. So, she doesn't want.
I
she
could
doesn't
almost
want to
say she probably wrote those things. She never wrote anything to get a job or advance her career. She probably wrote those things because she was experiencing a deep affinity with Native Americans, and which means she has a heart, and she was grasping for either identity or just something to be behind that was good. And look how the Native Americans have been treated in this country from day one. So,
right.
But nevertheless, she didn't handle it smoothly, and she left Trump that ability to keep coming at her.
Right. But I guarantee if she were the candidate, that she would somehow she would get over on him somehow.
Oh, right. One day he'll say something, and she'll retort with something that you would think, wow, that's unheard of to speak to the President of the United States.
I think more than that, what she will do if she were to run is that she would talk about the issues, and how people have been hurt so badly by this administration, and what she would do to restore the confidence of the people in this country. And I can't imagine that she wouldn't win in a landslide. I just don't. He's got 30% of the people in his pocket, and he's not interested in anybody else. He's not interested in women. He's not interested in African Americans. He's not interested in Latinos. He's not interested in gays. He's not interested in Jews.
Certainly not.
He's got your sort of Midwestern white guys, and it's not enough to win an election.
Well, I hope so, because we couldn't take, in essence, 6 more years of this guy.
No.
Under any circumstances.
No. I know it.
And I'm hoping the Southern District of New York will chip in with some help, and I'm hoping Mueller's report gets at least noticed. It doesn't
it'll
come
get
back.
Noticed. Believe me, they're not covering. They are not covering it up. Mueller is too smart to let that happen. Believe me.
I hope he leaks it to the Times before.
Well, you'll get you'll get the Mueller papers, like the Pentagon papers. You'll see.
Right.
They're not smart enough to keep his report hidden.
Okay.
At any rate, Ralphie, let's call this a night, shall we?
Yeah, Mr. Littell hasn't joined us.
No, he will next time.
This was a good one. I enjoy chatting with you.
It's always a pleasure.
Clarifying the Lenny Dykstra thing.
Well, I'm finishing my book. I'm writing a book with Richard Painter. We're writing about the history of the breaking of the rule of law in American history. I've just about finished this thing. It's going to be spectacular. And
wonderful.
I can't wait till it comes out. It should come out probably in December.
Beautiful.
Yep.
Maybe next week we'll talk about it, if nothing else.
Sure, we can do that.
I'd like that very much.
All right. Have a great week,
Thank you, Peter.
All right, my
You
pleasure.
too, my friend.
Thank
you for listening, everybody. Golenbock University, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. Adios. The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.